We are on location today at the Silversides Museum in Muskegon, Michigan. This production is sort of a collaboration between WKTV Voices and the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. I'm James Smither, the director of the project. I'll be doing the interview today, and we're talking to Mr. Marc Okkonen of Muskegon, Michigan. So, Marc, can you begin by giving us some background on yourself, and to begin with, just where and when were you born?
Well, I was born here in Muskegon in 1933, and I went to Muskegon High School, graduated in 1951.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living when you were a kid?
Well, it was a depression time, you know. My stepdad was out of work most of the time during the 30s, but he went back and forth, and he ended up toward the end of the 30s when things picked up. He did go to Detroit and worked in a factory there for a while, so that a lot of things happened in 1939-40 that pulled a lot of families out of near poverty. And of course, my mother was just a housewife and a mother. I had two brothers and a sister, so there were four of us kids.
Okay. And when your stepfather got the job in Detroit, did you stay out here, or?
Oh yeah, he just commuted. I mean, he went there, you know, for a week. He might come home on weekends, but it was a blessing because, you know, he was getting pretty darn good wages working in, I think it was Graham Page in one of those auto factories in Detroit.
Okay, because there were a fair amount of industry in the Muskegon area at that time,
Yes,
too.
there was. Continental just started booming as soon as, about 1939-40 when the war started. Even though we weren't in the war yet, boy, we were.
Well, yeah, we were building up for it. We were selling
Absolutely.
things, and we were getting ready because Roosevelt knew we were going to get in.
The Lend-Lease Act created an awful lot of activity, and just a panic. I think Roosevelt realized that we were going to get sucked into that war, even though there were a lot of opposition to it. And he was smart enough to get the economy going and start building ships and increasing the army and tanks and all kinds of military equipment.
All right. Now, because you're a kid at that time, but do you remember hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Absolutely. I was 8 years old at the time, and I remember being in the backyard playing, and a neighbor kid from across the alley came running up. He said, "The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor." We didn't know where that was, didn't even know what it meant. Well, finally it was explained to us that it was, you know, in the Hawaiian Islands. And the irony, or the tragedy in our neighborhood, was a neighbor kid who lived only half a block from us, right by the school. Homer Hopkins was our first casualty. He was on the Arizona. Now, there was another kid from Muskegon too, but Homer, for some reason, gets all the credit for being the first casualty. And I don't remember Homer very well, but I can remember him being home on leave one time, and I was just a kid, and boy, I was really impressed with that all white Navy uniform. But it was really sad because Homer, his family were honored for that. You know, his mother was the head of the Gold Star Mothers in Muskegon, and in later years, I think they launched a couple of ships. I don't know if any of them were named after Homer, but they were really honored for being a Gold Star family in Muskegon.
Okay. Now, how did the war affect ordinary life in Muskegon, or did it?
Well, it with everybody getting jobs. But when you say war, after Pearl Harbor or up to Pearl Harbor?
Well, actually, after Pearl Harbor, because you kind of covered the employment
Yeah,
part.
once Pearl Harbor came, then all of a sudden all the restrictions came along, and you had to have gas rationing, and the main reason for that gas rationing, I think they had plenty of gas, but it was to keep tires from being worn out. And boy, during the war years, people who were using recaps and everything else to try to keep their car going. And of course, we had food rationing, stamps for everything. Well, not everything, but coffee and sugar and butter and a lot of the favorite things. Meat was, you know, hard to come by because, boy, it was all going over to the guys in the service. But of course, we were poor anyway. I don't remember ever having a steak when I was a kid. But and so it was always ground beef or easy to prepare meals.
All right. Did they do things like air raid drills?
Yep,
Or?
we had an air raid warden on our block. Every block had an air raid warden, and they'd have blackouts, and he would come around and make sure everybody had their lights out during this blackout. When you think about it, the likelihood of an air attack was pretty remote, but who knew? I mean, nobody predicted Pearl Harbor, so they had to be ready for that.
All right. Okay. So when did you finish high school?
1951.
Okay. Now by that time the Korean War had started.
Yes, it had. It started the year before, in 1950.
Okay. And had you registered for the draft and all of that by then, or?
Not quite yet. I can't remember when I had to register, but I didn't get drafted until 53, so I was 19, I think, when I got drafted.
Okay. Now, and what did you do after you finished high school?
I worked in the factory, Continental Motors. I was a good student. I was a college prep student with the National Honor Society credentials, but I just wasn't ready to go to college. I mean, I guess I was so relieved to not have to do homework, so I just went to work in the factory. And
did you live at home at that point?
yes, I did.
All right. And so, now did you follow the course of the Korean War, or did you just ignore it?
Oh no, I followed it. In fact, a neighborhood kid, Ted Lawrence, he quit school to join the Army, and he was killed early in the war in Korea. And I remember another neighbor kid who was an excellent boxer, light heavyweight. Boy, he had a great future. He went over there and got his legs shot off in Korea. So, we were well aware of what was going on. And but it's funny, when you're only 18 or 19, you'd think you'd be panicky about, what was going to happen. And even when I got drafted, I just kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, well, everybody's got to go. And so when I went in, a bunch of us from Muskegon went, of course, at the same time.
Okay. And when was that?
In April of 1953.
Okay.
They sent us to Camp Atterbury, Indiana for basic training.
All right. And describe a little bit what that was like.
Well, for me, it was an adventure because, I was just a kid from a nothing neighborhood in Muskegon, hadn't really even seen the big city or anything. And it was probably good for me to get away from home, and going in the Army with a whole bunch of kids from different walks of life. And I think that's one of the things I regret, that the draft is gone, because it's just such a good experience in many ways for a teenage kid to get thrown into a group of kids from all different nationalities and neighborhoods.
Okay. Well, Muskegon had an ethnic mix in its population when you were growing up. Were there black kids in your high school and that kind of thing?
Not in Muskegon High School. We had very few blacks.
Okay.
There were blacks. I mean, I had them in junior high, but not very many. And Muskegon Heights was really, they had imported so many southern blacks, especially once the war got going, bring them up here and work in the foundries. And of course, foundries are god-awful jobs, but they paid well. And so many blacks came into Muskegon Heights at that time. And but I remember in high school, I bet maybe 5% of our class was black.
All right.
In fact, it was kind of funny because our student council president's name was Art Somerville. He was a black guy. Everybody liked him. He was a very popular guy, but that was unusual.
Okay. Now, what do you think the mix of people was in your basic training group?
It was a pretty good mixture. In fact, they had just, integrated the armed forces a few years earlier.
Right.
And, we had black NCOs in basic training, and it seemed to work fine. I mean, Of course, I didn't know any different. You know, I wasn't in World War II when they were segregated, so.
Okay, but then now, as far as you could tell, were the men in your basic training company, were they just from a couple of different states, or?
Pretty much so. They were, it seemed like maybe close to half of them were from Muskegon area, and the other half were from Indiana.
Okay.
So we got to know a little bit about Hoosier hillbillies.
All right. Now, what kind of physical shape were you in when you went in?
Well, I was kind of a skinny runt, and I really developed. Not maybe I would have anyway, just at my age. Boy, I think once I got into basic training, you know, my chest filled out, and I think probably the improved diet. I mean, the Army diet, you could complain about it all you wanted to, but that was a very balanced and very well planned food diet. I think that really helped me just, you know, suddenly mature into a healthier young man.
Okay. Now, what did the training itself actually consist of?
Well, there was 16 weeks of light weapons infantry. All the things that an infantryman has to do, we did, and like I say, it was pretty cut and dried. We were being trained for pipeline replacement to Korea because the war was still going on.
Okay. Now, and you talk about the weapons and so forth. What different kinds of weapons did you train with?
Well, the usual, you know, all the rifles, the BARs, recoilless rifles, not artillery because we were in the infantry, but
So
the bazookas,
machine guns.
machine guns, 30 caliber, 50 caliber machine guns, grenades, gas training. We, you know, would have to go into a little room and take our gas masks off and come out gasping for air. And I can remember one of the things that everybody remembers, that they would put you in a foxhole and drive a tank over that foxhole. I mean, it was perfectly safe, really, but it was just knowing that huge machine was going over your head.
All right. Now, did they spend a lot of time on the sort of drill and discipline stuff?
Yeah, we did what they used to call close order drill. You know, we had to learn how to march and do all these standard things. And there was always people in the outfit that didn't know right from left, and it's kind of sad, but it was just learning the basics of how to march and go into formations.
Okay. Now, how did the drill sergeants treat you?
They were okay. I mean, they could be kind of mean, but I think you could almost tell that they did so because that's the way they were trained to do it. But they weren't brutal. I mean, although they used to do mean things, I can remember going out on bivouac or this is in the summertime, and hotter than hell in Indiana, and it had what they call these lister bags, great big canvas bags that had drinking water in them. And we would be just dying of thirst, and they would gleefully empty that damn lister bag in front of us. They had what they called at the time water discipline. They've changed that completely. They don't do that anymore, but they used to have the idea that if you could try to survive on as little water as possible, and I think nowadays they don't even go that way. They just make damn sure you got plenty of water.
Yeah. Well, certainly in Vietnam, if they didn't do that, we'd have been in serious trouble.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, while you're there, did the armistice in Korea happen, or where does that come in?
Yeah, I was about 2/3 of the way through basic training, and they announced that there was an armistice or ceasefire. Boy, what a relief that was. We had a commanding officer, the first lieutenant, who had served in Korea, and it almost seemed to us like he was disappointed because, you know, he was training us to go over there and went through the same crap he went through. But it was a relief, and it changed everything. once that happened, our whole division, we finished our basic training there, and we stayed right there at Camp Atterbury, right on through about January or so, and then.
So how did you, once you finished the training, what were you doing at Camp Atterbury?
Well, it's funny because they changed their division. I got put into I forget it, was it an artillery battery? I can't even remember what my MOS was.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't infantry, you know. But it's funny, I was in artillery the rest of the war, or the rest of my time period in there, but I never served a day of cannoneer training.
Mm-hmm. So what were you doing then? What was your job?
Well, I'm trying to remember when I got reassigned. It wasn't a difficult job. I had a talent too. I could do artwork, and I can remember making a massive board with pegs on it where you'd hang all the assignments of the whole damn company, and the commanders could just keep that thing up to date. It was fun to do, and I got rewarded for it, but I don't remember what my function was at the time.
Okay. Do you think you were part of a headquarters unit at that point, or?
Not in that Atterbury. It wasn't headquarters. That didn't happen until I got overseas.
Okay.
And then they changed. There was a 31st Division when I was in 31st Dixie Division. They changed over to the 8th Division, and then I ended up. They sent me to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas, late in the year for fire direction training, which again was, when I look back on it, it could have been frightening if the war was going on, because that was a dangerous assignment. Fire direction control meant that you had to be right on the front lines watching artillery fire and directing it to, you know.
Yeah. Well, I guess there's two pieces to that. One is the forward observer part, where you're up there looking at things. The other one is being back there with the battery and doing the calculations.
Yeah, this was forward observer training. And again, thankfully the war was over. I mean, maybe even then I didn't realize how dangerous that would have been over there, because I guess survival rate among forward observers was not very good, because you know you're right up there in the front and right in the front lines,
And you had to stick your head up.
yeah, that's right. But I got through that cycle, that fire direction training. But I can remember, boy, I reached a point where I was a good student in everything I did, but boy, toward the end of there, I just didn't give a damn anymore. But I just barely made it through there. But I did get that MOS, which got me into the artillery headquarters unit in Korea.
So about how long do you think you had spent at Camp Atterbury in total?
Well, I got there in April, and while I was there, our division, after it had changed to the 8th Division, they moved us to Camp Carson, Colorado, which was, gosh, I'm trying to think, late in the year. So I was probably at Camp Atterbury from April to about December, November.
Okay. Now, and where did the stint at Camp Chaffee fall in? Was that after you went to Colorado, or was that before?
I'm trying to think if I got assigned there from Atterbury or from Carson. I think it was from Atterbury.
Okay. Now, when you were at Atterbury after you finished the training, did you get to go off base or do other things?
Yeah, we could go into Indianapolis, and on weekends I'd hitchhike home. You know, in those days hitchhiking was pretty common, especially if you were in the service. You know, if you had a uniform on and you're thumbing their way, people would pick you up.
Okay. All right. And in general, how did people seem to treat soldiers?
Oh, fine. Fine. I think this has nothing to do with the military, but boy, I can remember one time the smartest thing to do is if you had hitchhiking pairs or more, because I got picked up by a guy who was clearly possibly a sexual predator. And boy, he started asking me questions, and I was kind of naive, And boy, those questions started getting pretty bad. I didn't know what the hell he was up to, so we finally got to a small town in Indiana. I just got out of the car. That was not a very memorable experience, but that was pretty rare.
Yeah. All right. And then when you're in Colorado, did you go any place off base or just stay on Camp
Yeah,
Carson?
it was nice. It was right by Pikes Peak in Colorado Springs. So it was an interesting place to be. You didn't have to go very far. We were quite a ways from Denver, but I can remember going to hockey games at Colorado College. They had a good hockey team in those days. In those days, Michigan's hockey team was super. I mean, they were winning NCAA titles. And I remember I went out. I didn't go with the unit as a convoy. A friend of mine from Battle Creek had a car, and we went out just in his car and drove out to Colorado. And of course, he had his car when we were there, so we could take a drive up Pikes Peak. And, it was for a kid from Muskegon, just being in the mountains was quite a thrill.
Okay. Now, when you're out in Colorado now, do you have an expectation that you're going to be sent overseas, or do you really not know?
I had no idea that what they were going to do, because hell, they kept us in the States all that time, But sooner or later, they started picking everybody off and assigning them either to Far East or Europe. And of course, I ended up with the assignment to Korea.
Okay. At the time, where did you want to go?
Oh, Europe, definitely. I mean, I had a lot more interest in Europe than the Far East. But again, I have no regrets that it happened that way, because I probably would never have gotten to Japan and Korea on my own.
Okay. So when do they ship you out?
Overseas?
Yeah.
Yeah, I left, I would say, about March of '54. I was almost a year in the States. And I ended up, it was a long trip. They took the northern route, and we had to make a stop for something. 21 days at sea, but thank God the weather wasn't that bad. Once in a while, there were some days of, a lot of pitching and rolling and seasickness, but...
What kind of ship were you on?
Troop ship.
All right.
Standard troop ship. That's the way they were sending us over. And when we left the San Francisco area, we had to go down south to San Diego area and pick up a whole bunch of Marines to get on board. So there were Marines with us on that troop ship.
And then from San Diego, you still took a northern route?
Yeah, it took quite a while to get to Japan, but boy, that to me was such a thrill. I mean, to go to Japan, we landed at Sasebo, finally got off the ship, and just to walk through one of these Japanese villages and see these little Japanese, it was like a whole different world. For me, that was really an exciting experience. And I got lucky at first, because I was there about a week waiting for what they usually did is just put you on an LST or to Busan, and then you went on to wherever they were going to send you. But they picked out certain people, and I don't know why, but I got picked out to go to what they called CBR school, 2 weeks in a place called Etajima in Japan, which during the war was the Japanese Navy's Annapolis. Beautiful place, beautiful building. I mean, after living on a damn troop ship and living in barracks, and boy, that was heaven to be in a place like that. They had a huge mess hall that was open all the time. It was an open base. You could walk on and off the damn post. So those were the best 2 weeks I had in the Army, at Etajima.
So what was CBR training?
Chemical, biological, radiological training.
So what did that actually consist of?
Well, just explaining radiation and some of the, unusual methods of warfare, so you could be familiar with it. I guess the idea was that every unit had to have a few people that had that training, so if it ever became a factor. But here's an interesting thing that happened while I was at Etajima. I can remember picking up the Stars and Stripes, and that was the time that the French got their ass kicked at Dien Bien Phu in Indochina. I thought, ooh, what's going on there? And at the time, the Secretary of State was John Foster Dulles.
Mm-hmm.
And he was all for us intervening and on behalf of the French and going in and bailing them out. Thank God Eisenhower had nothing to do with it. But I thought, God, after all that crap we went through in Korea, are they going to send us to another place? So we escaped that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll never forget that, reading about that Dien Bien Phu while I was in Japan.
Okay. So then when do you get to Korea?
Well, it was after 2 weeks of the CBR school. They sent me back to Sasebo. That was kind of jumping off point.
Right.
And like I say, most people went from Sasebo directly to LST to Busan, and then by Toonerville trolley trains up
Right.
north. But they didn't do it that way with us. We got on a big troop ship there at Sasebo and went around just like MacArthur at Incheon.
Okay.
And I got off the boat there.
All right. And then once they land you there, what do they do with you?
Well, I can remember coming off that, they didn't have a harbor at Incheon. You had to sit out in the deep water and then get on rafts or barges to take you inland. And so you had to go down that damn ladder well on the side of that troop ship, which was forever. And then they would put you in a truck, and you felt like cattle. They had big trucks, guys who just packed with the, standing GIs in the back. And we got off, and of course, then they put us on trains. And I was assigned in the eastern part of Korea, far away from Seoul. So we went by train to Chuncheon, and I don't remember how we got to where I was eventually stationed, but it was a little bit north of Chuncheon. But it was north of the 38th parallel, and not too far from the DMZ. In fact, we were just south of a couple of historic places, Heartbreak Ridge and the Punch Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, our headquarters was north of a little village called Yanggu.
Okay. What was your first impression of Korea when you got there?
Well, it was, after being in Japan, it was like night and day. I mean, Korea was so primitive at that time. It seemed like all the roads were gravel roads built by the Army Corps of Engineers during the war. The people lived in shacks that were, half of them were, the siding was sea ration boxes. I mean, when I think about it, how they have progressed over the decades, I don't even want to go back there because I wouldn't even recognize it. Seoul was halfway decent. It was almost like a modern city, but boy, and the trains were a joke over there. I mean, it was, like I say, Toonerville trolley type trains. They were all broken down. Half of the windows were out, and I can remember being on one of those Korean trains and going through a tunnel. Of course, they're coal burning, and going through a tunnel with half the windows broken out. It about drove you nuts. So coal dust was coming in the windows. I mean, it's kind of a joke when I look back on it, but I'm sure if you go over there now, they probably have high-speed trains better than the ones we have. So,
Okay. And then what unit were you joining?
well, I went to the 24th Division Artillery Headquarters.
Okay. And what did you know about the background, or what have you learned about the 24th Division?
Well, they were the first American units to enter the Korean War. Task Force Smith was the first American troops that got into the Korean War, and they had a rough time. They lost a big battle in Daejeon or someplace, and in fact their general was General Dean was captured by the North Koreans, and he served the rest of the war as a prisoner. But anyway, they were the first ones to come in contact. And then, of course, we were down to that Busan perimeter at the time. That was what they were defending. And, of course, at that time, MacArthur pulled his brilliant Incheon landing. I mean, that was a brilliant move. But that was mostly Marines, I think, that got that thing going. But they just broke the back of the North Korean army. And the 24th stayed in that war in combat for, I don't know, a year or two. But after a while, since they were the first ones there, they gave them a break and reassigned them to occupation duty in Japan. But when the war ended, they sent them back over there to handle a lot of, I think, a lot of prisoner exchanges and things. So that's why they were there when I got there.
Okay. Now, at the time you joined them, what was their function? What were they doing?
Oh, 24th?
Yeah.
I think they were just in place as a kind of a, I can remember we were, like I say, south of the DMZ and Heartbreak Ridge, some of the key points on the demilitarized zone, and I remember all our artillery batteries were zeroed in on wherever the passes were that, you know, if they did start the war again, that they would come in there. So
Did you have units that were along the front line, or do you not know?
well, close. I mean, I think those artillery units were up close enough to that DMZ that you know, they could have sent
Yeah.
artillery.
Well, part of it is the 24th divisions and the infantry divisions.
Correct,
They have line
correct.
units. And I guess the question was, were the line units, did they
Yeah,
take turns
I
up there?
can't tell you exactly where their infantry units were, but I have a feeling they were pretty damn close to the DMZ.
Okay. All right. And so what kind of job did you have now?
Well, I was artillery operations draftsman, but with no war on, there wasn't a lot to do that followed my MOS definition. So it was just that we would sit in an office. We had a Quonset office, and half the time I would operate the switchboard, plug it in, Duke FTC, you know, and just do odds and ends. Once in a while, our S3 commander would give me a map job, you know, to work on some of the map drawings of using them. But basically, once there was no war, there wasn't much for me to do. But,
All right. How would you describe the base that you were on? What did that look like?
well, it kind of looked like what you see on MASH. You know, it was all squad tents. We
Okay.
had squad tents and Quonset huts, and it wasn't bad. I mean, it was very isolated. There was nothing around us.
Were there any Korean villages in the area?
And not really close. I think Yanggu was the closest one, and boy, that was nothing. I don't even remember what it looked like. You had no reason to go there. And
Right. Okay. Did you have any Koreans who worked on the base in one capacity?
Yeah,
or
well,
another?
we had Katusas, kids from the Korean Army. I forget. Korean attachment to the U.S. Army.
Mhm.
They called them Katusas. And we had a Korean barber. And the thing I remember so much about that was that, you know, kimchi is a very popular dish in Korea.
Mhm.
It's a fermented salad that just reeks with garlic, and I hate garlic.
Mhm.
It's that smell that just makes me sick. And that damn Korean barber, if I went there after lunch sometimes, he had just scarfed down a bunch of kimchi, and oh my God, I almost suffocated trying to hold my breath while he was cutting my hair because of that damn garlic smell. But so we had that, and we had, might have had some other Korean volunteers that did some kind of dirty work around there.
Mhm. All right. And did you spend all of your time on the base, or?
Yes,
Okay.
just about 100%. There's no place to go.
Okay.
In fact, it was kind of one of the better times in the Army. I really had some good workmates there, guys that were well educated, and it just so happened that when we worked in that S3 office, there were about 3 or 4 of us enlisted men that knew how to play pinochle. So, boy, we spent almost every evening. You know, one guy would be assigned to stay on quarters,
Mhm.
and the rest of us would just come over and sit in the office with him and play pinochle. And boy, did that help pass the time away.
All right. Now, what rank were you at this point?
Well, I was private up until, probably midsummer. I finally made PFC. Almost made corporal the following year, too. But, I kind of regret that. I wish I would have at least made corporal, but it wasn't totally my fault because rank was frozen for quite a while there.
Mhm. Now, do you have a sense that the Army was downsizing at all at this period?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not really. I don't think they were quite ready to say, everything's fine, because it was a very, very touchy armistice.
So there were not other units deploying back home or that kind of thing?
No, I don't think anybody moved, except when, like I say, when they decided to move our division back to Japan.
Mhm.
I don't think any major movement. That might have been, no, I didn't follow it that closely because there were Marine units there and Corps units. And
Mhm.
they may have, pulled out of Korea once the things
Okay.
settled down.
Now, during the time when you were there, were there ever any alerts or incidents along the MZ?
Very minor. I mean, I've talked to other guys that were in Korea when I was there after the war, and some of these people, it's hard for them to admit that the war wasn't going on when they want to be war veterans, and I think they'd make up stories, and I don't believe any of it. To me, it was almost like Boy Scout camp when I was over there. But once in a while, we'd get what they call a red alert, and what would happen is, say, some small observation plane would fly over the DMZ, and boy, they'd just go crazy because they didn't know what that meant.
Hmm.
So we'd get a red alert, and we'd have to, we all had assigned foxholes around that compound, and we had to put our steel pots in and get our weapon and jump in that foxhole. But that didn't usually last long, and before, after a very short time it was over because we know what it was. However, one time when that happened, it just so happened the Army Corps of Engineers was working on a road not far from us on a hillside, and they were using explosives. And we got in that foxhole, and I started hearing a few blasts. I thought, oh my God, what's going on here? You didn't know what the hell that was. I thought maybe they're dropping bombs, but it turned out to be the Corps of Engineers blasting away a hillside for a road.
Okay. Now, when you think about the time that you spent in Korea, is there anything else that sort of stands out in your memory of that period?
Oh, obviously, going to Japan.
Well, that's sort of the next step in the
Oh,
story.
okay.
I was thinking about before you got to Japan.
Well, I know, but before we got stationed there,
Mhm.
I went there a couple times.
Okay.
On R&R, and once I even took a leave. And the interesting thing is, I had a very good friend I've known all my life. He got drafted a month after I did, but he was over there already with the 5th Regimental Combat Team in Korea. We stayed in touch.
Mm-hmm.
When we made arrangements to try to leave at the same time in Tokyo and then meet. Well, he, at the last minute, he said they had to cancel their trip to Japan, so I thought, well, that's opportunity lost. So I got to Japan and got on one of those tour buses, and we're driving along a street in Tokyo, and I knew he had a 5th Regimental Combat Team was a red Pentagon
Mhm.
patch. And I can remember on that bus we were driving along, and here's a bunch of guys with this 5th RCT patches on. I looked, and that was my buddy was in there, and I hollered out the bus window. He saw me, and I got him to catch up to the bus, and I got off the bus, or at least I told him where I was
Mhm.
staying at a hotel. We ended up spending that time together. Boy, that was a lucky break. So we spent about a week together in Tokyo. And then one other time I went on a R&R to Fukuoka in the southern part of Japan. And of course, Japanese never lost their love for baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going to a so-called Japanese World Series game there. So it was. Then, of course, they ended up in November, our whole unit moved back to Japan.
Okay. And when the unit moved back, where did they go in Japan?
Okay, they went to, well, we left Korea. I can remember some officers got stuck in what they called KMAG, Korean Military Assistant Group.
Mm-hmm.
But our lieutenant colonel and our S3 that we worked for, he was laughing when we left. He says, KMAG, kiss my ass goodbye, because we were leaving Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we got on at Incheon again and went around to Japan, and we ended up in a place called Camp Otsu, which was in the central part of Honshu, right north of Kyoto.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a nice place too. That was, I forget what that was during the war, but it was some kind of Japanese army base. And so, boy, that was heaven, you know, to be in a nice modern building, you know, had good barracks and good beds and good food. And the funny part is the commanding officer, that was the Southwest Command, Army Southwest Command headquarters
Mm-hmm.
on that base. And the commanding general was a guy named Zwicker. And at the time, Zwicker was in the headlines because he was part of that damn Army McCarthy scandal.
Okay.
And he kind of got blacklisted by the Army, and they had to get him out of sight. So they shipped him all the way over to Japan to where our thing, I can remember saluting him a few
Mm-hmm.
times. But anyway, Otsu was really nice. I mean, you could get on a bus and go to Kyoto to a movie theater or whatever. I mean, it was just heaven compared to being in Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Until we got the news that they changed their mind.
Okay, so so about how long were you based in Japan?
At the end, probably about 2 or 3 months. It seems to
Okay.
me I've spent Thanksgiving in Japan and
Mhm.
left there in January.
All right. So the news comes that you're going to be sent back to Korea?
The whole unit, yeah.
Okay.
They had only moved part of the division before they changed their mind, so some of them guys never left Korea anyway.
Okay. And now what happens to you in all this?
Well, it was close enough that I had already applied for early discharge to go to college,
Mhm.
which would have got me out in January instead of April. If I hadn't have done that, in fact, it almost didn't work. I had sent my form in to Muskegon Junior College at the time, and I knew the principal, not called principal there, but anyway, the administrator, J. Harold Caesar. He was my principal at Angels Junior High, and of course he knew me. And for some reason the Army turned that down, and I got in touch with him, and he managed to get that turned around, because I know other guys that did the same thing and it worked. Anyway, so I got those orders probably in late December or January, and so that meant I was slated to leave Japan in January anyway. So, and I don't know when our units actually started moving back to Korea, but I think I got out of there before that started anyway.
Okay. Now how do they get you back to the States?
Oh, the troop ship.
Okay.
Went to Yokohama and got on a troop ship.
All right. And what was that trip like?
That wasn't bad. It was only not like going over. Going over was 21 days. This time I think it was 10 or 11 days.
Okay.
And
Was the weather all right? Or
yeah, I don't recall getting any really violent weather.
now on these trips would people get seasick anyway?
Sometimes, yeah. It didn't take much for some people to get seasick, including me, but not really bad. There were a lot of times when I was woozy, right on the verge, but not really just heaving over the railing. But there's nothing, even though I wasn't overseas that long, there's nothing like approaching this coastline of California and seeing that Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, that was the land of the big PX. What a relief.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you get back, where do they send you for discharge? Or
Well, I went to by Northwestern,
is it Fort Sheridan?
Fort
or-
Sheridan, yeah. That was 5th Army headquarters. That was the separation center.
Okay. And then, so you get back home, you just start up college at that point?
Yeah, I did. I did complete a semester there, and but I still wasn't ready to keep going, and I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't come back and fall. And it hurt me later on because, they had a Korean GI Bill then,
Mhm.
which I got paid for that one semester at junior college. But if I'd have went back later and not, continued continuously, they didn't cover it. If you couldn't interrupt it or delay it. So in later years, when I was piecing together my junior college thing, I never got that GI Bill anymore.
All right. So after that one semester at school, what did you do?
I stayed in Muskegon. I worked downtown at the Sears store for a while, and then I ended up going back to Continental Motors.
Mm-hmm.
They were always hiring, paying well, and so I spent pretty much that time up to getting drafted. Oh wait, no,
Yeah.
I'm sorry,
You're
I'm
back
getting
home
my
now,
time period confused.
Yeah.
I went back. Oh, I went back to. I was a good draftsman. I could draw, always was, and I got a job as a draftsman with one of these job shops. And sooner or later, though, I had friends that worked at the drafting room at Continental Getty Street plant, and I got in there. So I was there at Continental Motors drafting room on the hill. Oh gosh, from 55 to 58. I was there about 3 years.
Okay. Now, eventually, later on in life, you do complete a 4-year college
Yeah,
degree.
what happened is I got married in 63, moved to California in 65, and I can't tell you why I thought, I might as well see if I can get an AA degree. So I went to 2 or 3 junior colleges and took night classes, some at Berkeley, and gathered up enough credits to get an AA degree out there. And once I got that, I remember I was in a library in Oakland, and I happened to see this pamphlet from the University of Michigan, Dearborn. I started looking at that, and I thought, I always loved Michigan. That's been my favorite place. My brother went there, and I was a big Michigan Wolverine fan. Anyway, I looked at that, and I saw, that's just a small college. It's a University of Michigan, but it's small, and it's junior and senior years. And at the time, my wife, who didn't want to go to California to begin with, and she didn't want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
So she reluctantly, of course, I couldn't resist signing up for the Dearborn campus.
Mm-hmm.
So I moved back to Detroit. Actually, I worked for the Detroit News for a while because I had to be a Michigan citizen for 6 months before not having to pay out-state tuition.
Okay. So now you're going to college in the late 1960s.
Yeah.
To what extent did the Vietnam era affect things there?
Well, not too much. I mean, like I say, Dearborn was so small that there wasn't that much unrest, even though there was a lot of it in Ann Arbor.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, to me, I was just an observer. I didn't have to worry about it.
Right.
I had done my time.
Did you meet any students there who had been to Vietnam or anything like that?
I don't know if I met any that were Vietnam veterans, but there were some that had been in the Army.
Okay.
Like I say, I had a buddy there that accused me of being in the Brown Shoe Army, which always struck me as kind of funny.
Okay. And what did that mean?
Well, it meant that they changed colors about the time I got out of the service, and no longer brown was no longer the official shoe color; it was black.
Okay. All right. And then, in the long run, how do you wind up back in Muskegon?
Ooh. I stayed in Detroit for a while, and I got divorced about that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I had worked for a company in California that manufactured telephone booths, and they really liked what I did, but they knew what, I had gone back to school. Somehow they got a hold of me. That was quite a thing. I didn't think they would ever have any way of getting a hold of me. And they had a job opening in Belleville, Illinois, and I took that job, and it was probably one of the best things I ever did. I got the hell out of Detroit, and kind of almost was reborn down there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was there for about 2 or 3 years, and But by that time, I think they were getting ready to move that sales office back to California. So I was ready to go back to California myself, only this time Southern California. So I did. In fact, I got my nephew, who was at U of M at the time. He wanted to go there just to see it. So he went with me, and we drove our way out to California, Southern California.
Okay. I guess you to California. Doesn't get you back to Muskegon, though.
No.
Did you just retire out here, or? Did you
Yeah,
have-
I was in Southern California for a long time, about 13 years, and then I had a job out there with a company called Wells Fargo Alarm Services. It had nothing to do with the bank. It was a split off, but they made security systems, and I was doing some illustrating and writing for some of their literature, technical literature, and but at that time I started getting interested in baseball research, baseball uniforms especially. And I got so long on that thing, and I thought, I can't do this out in California. Hell, all the information is in the northeast quadrant of the country.
Right.
And I was getting tired of California anyway. I had no roots there. So I thought, well, I'm just going to move back to New York State and be close to Cooperstown and keep up this. But the irony is, a nice irony is that these people at Wells Fargo didn't want to lose me, because I was pretty valuable for things that they were doing, and they knew what they could get out of me. So they ended up almost every month for about 9 years, I would commute to California, spend 10 days out there, gave me a nice little piece of income, survival money, and so I kind of left California, but I didn't leave. I was in and out of that place for another 9 years. And finally, in 95, I quit. I haven't been to California since then.
Okay.
This had nothing to do with being a veteran, I guess. But
No, but it sort of follows out sort of the story here. I guess, and if you look back on the whole thing, how do you think your time in the service affected you, or what did you take out of it?
Well, as a person, it was just invaluable. I mean, I don't know if it helped me career-wise or anything else. It just the idea that, being a kid from a small town like Muskegon and getting out into the world, I think I needed that, because, I was kind of felt trapped in the house that I was living in here, and it was hard for me then to be that independent, to just get up and leave, but I did. And I think being in the Army helped a lot, because, I had already left home for a long time anyway. So
All right.
I recommend it. I know it's not realistic, and it's probably never going to happen, but I still think the draft is not a bad idea. It's probably more cumbersome, probably not as efficient as an all-volunteer military, but I think just for the average citizen to have that obligation is really helpful. I mean, for a lot of kids, I think they have to do that. In fact, it's kind of like Israel. I guess you can't survive in Israel without spending some kind of time.
Well, an awful
in the
lot of
military.
countries now have national service. The European countries mostly do, and that kind of thing, and it's just part of what you do. And
And
you
it
might be in the military, might be doing something else.
Yeah, and a lot of it's not just luck of the draw. You just have to do it. I mean, even here there was a little bit of the luck of the draw, but and so I just think that's good experience for anybody.
Okay. Well, for a man who began by telling me you didn't really have a story, you've done a pretty good job. So thank you
Well,
very much for sharing.
Well, I hope so.